My name is Frank Carter. I'm the Student Veterans Association president of the University of Michigan-Dearborn. Background about military. I was in for 7 years. I was in the Army. Got out, 2 deployments. I was stationed at Fort Bragg, stationed up in Alaska. As far as DEI in the military, as far as my experiences with diversity and inclusion in the military, when I was at Fort Bragg, it was an infantry unit. So infantry, if you guys don't know what infantry is, it's mainly a male-dominated career field. It just recently changed over to integrate women into the MOS as well. When I was there, it was primarily male. So you have all male, how can I put it? It's kind of like high school. So you got little groups or people that click together, and you kind of have the cool kids over here, and you got the jocks over there, the nerdy kids over there. I was in between the nerdy and the jock kids. And with these little groups, these cliques, when they click together, they form opinions of certain things, of certain people. One of the biggest issues that I saw when I was in the military was that of not including those of the LGBTQ plus community. That's the main thing I saw. There was a lot of derogatory remarks towards those groups. It was a lot of just mean-spirited jokes about those individuals. And it didn't seem like a very inclusive place. Now, throughout the time, there's been a lot of policy changes in the military, a lot of things that have changed for the better. And I do see that the LGBTQ plus community is getting more of a say in the military. Now, as far as me being Black, being a person of color, I didn't see much discrimination in the military. However, there was one thing that really stuck out to me, and it saddened me because I just realized what was going on after I got out of the military. One of the soldiers that was in the scout platoon, he was of Asian descent, and they had a nickname for him, and they would call him this nickname. I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was a funny nickname. I thought it was something more so directed towards his mental capacity versus anything else. And even I call him this nickname. The nickname that I'm referring to is they refer to him as Coconut. I thought it was just because he was dumb as a coconut. So I laughed at that. However, realizing what they were saying only after the fact, it was because they felt that he was brown on the outside, but white on the inside, which really is pretty messed up. Now, our guest speaker, I don't know if they're going to be able to join, but if they can come in, they were going to talk about the Montford Point Marines, who were the first all-Black Marine unit to integrate into the military back in, I think it was early 1900s or 1950s, excuse me. And in doing so, once they integrated into the military, they faced a lot of discrimination, a lot of just discrimination and hate against them for being a all-Black Marine unit, which is pretty rough. So to give you a little bit of background about the Montford Point Marines, as I was saying, that they were actually established in 1941. And out of Jacksonville, North Carolina. They trained at Camp Montford Point. They saw action in World War II, Okinawa, and I believe part of the Korean War as well.
Hey, Frank?
Yes.
Hey, I have pulled up about a 6-minute video if you want.
Ah, yes,
Show
please.
that real quick. Would that be okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
June 25th, 1941, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802, establishing the fair employment by the armed forces. From 1942 to 1949, a few brave African-American men changed the face of the United States Marine Corps forever. Faced with many challenges, they set out to make a difference and ended up making history. Listen as 3 Montford Point Marines share a personal story of honor, courage, and commitment.
My name is Robert D. Reed, served 26 years in the Corps, from 1948 till 1974. The reason why I joined the Marine Corps was because at the time there was a draft, and when I graduated from high school, my buddies and I said, let's find out what the military is all about. Collectively, we said, let's do the Marine Corps. They seem to be some pretty tough guys. Now, we had joined. We weren't drafted, we joined the Marine Corps. They never told us that we were going to a separate boot camp. Well, the first couple of weeks was pure hell. My drill instructor, he was the one that told us that if you're going to be a black Marine, you're going to have to be better than anybody else. Better.
Subjected to very intense training, Reed and his fellow Montford Point Marines endured the hardships of boot camp, pushing them to limits most Marines had never experienced.
Well, the thing is, after my tour was up, came back to the States, and it just so happened that the Marine Aviation wanted to get blacks into their ranks. And I was one of the first blacks to go into Marine Aviation as an enlisted man. And my time in aviation wasn't until I got out of the Marine Corps.
Not only did the Montford Point Marines open doors, but they helped to set a precedent of courage for today's African-American Marines.
The Marine Corps was the last military service to be integrated. And I think that was the beginning of a new era of the Marine Corps.
The Montford Point Marines are extremely important. They were strong enough to take on a challenge that seemed to be insurmountable at that particular time. And for them, I do serve.
My name is Gene Dowdy. I was born in Stamford, Connecticut. I was really appointed by the Navy Department to serve in the Marines 7 months after the famous 8802 presidential proclamation allowed us to go into the Marine Corps. So I was one of the original pioneers. Montford Point Camp was a segregated camp. We felt the indignity that was thrown at us, but we had to learn, we had to face all of these challenges that we had.
Shortly after graduating from boot camp, Gene Dowdy's typical duties as an admin clerk shifted as the commandant began increasing the responsibilities of African-American Marines in the war campaign.
We ended up on the island of Iwo Jima. I landed on D-Day, incidentally, with a few ammunition companies and depot companies. It was very unpleasant, but I prevailed. I was glad to be in the Marine Corps, and I'm glad that I was honorably discharged. But going into the military service, I would consider, again, very gainful and a real true benefit.
The legacy of the Montford Point Marines, much like the famed 54th Infantry Regiment and the Tuskegee Airmen, is significant in the history of America and its armed forces.
I think it's something that a lot of people need to hear, to appreciate what they've actually done and to appreciate the opportunity that they created.
Charles O. Foreman. I joined the Marine Corps because I happen to be one of those people who does not like to be drafted. If I've got to do something, I like to do it on my own. I was ordered to go to Jacksonville, North Carolina, Montford Point. My experience in the boot camp was very typical.
During Foreman's time at the Montford Point camp, conditions were tough, as they were forced to build and live in wooden huts surrounded by the heavily rugged Jacksonville, North Carolina terrain.
After boot camp, the war in the Pacific was of course proceeding, and what was created was what they call the First Colored Replacement Battalion. And this was a group of men, I believe it was about 100 in the group. At that time, I think I had been promoted to a 3-stripe sergeant, and I was responsible for all these people. We sailed out of San Diego to Oahu. While there, I carried the title of acting first sergeant. Well, we actually stayed there for the duration of the war. If you asked me the question if I had it to do over again, yes, I would do it over again. Being in the Marine Corps helped because it gave me the backbone not to accept what was handed down. If you want something, you better stand up and fight for it.
Today, there are thousands of African American Marines serving in all fields and in every occupational specialty of the Marine Corps.
If a Montford Point Marine walked up to me today, I would say thank you. Thank you for paving the way. Thank you for creating an opportunity for myself and my brothers in arms that's come before me and those that are come after me.
So our guest of honor has arrived, Mr. Sergeant Major Owens. Can you hear us, Sergeant Major?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome, awesome. So this is Sergeant Major Owens. He's part of the Montford Point Detachment of the Marine Corps League. He is the subject matter expert on the Montford Point Marines, and I will turn it over to him, and he will give us, tell us about the Montford Point Marines. Go ahead, Sergeant Major.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. And I will say myself, the Montford Point Detachment that I belong to of the Marine Corps League was started by some of the original Montford Point Marines after World War II. And we're located in Detroit, on Joy Road in Detroit. And we're a veterans organization, just like the VFW, American Legion, or anything like that, but we're Marine Corps oriented. So, and the Montford Point Marines being the first African-American Marines in the Marine Corps, they, after World War II and they came back home, they started the detachment. As far as, did you want to give you the history, or what did you want to, of the Montford Point Marines?
Basically, so we watched the video, the 6-minute video, the YouTube video.
Yes.
If you can give us like stories about the Montford Point Marines and kind of what they went through and how they were treated in being the first all-Black Marine detachment.
Okay, well, the first thing about it was that the Montford Point Marines being all Black, but you're talking about a time of segregation, and altogether there was only like 18,000 that went through. And we're talking about a time of war when the Marine Corps was probably at its max. But when they first entered the Marine Corps, of course, they didn't want them there. And they was trained at Montford Point. That's where the name comes from. After they was trained, there was the 1st Battalion, which was the 51st Defense Battalion, was actually sent to the Pacific. And they split them up and they became part of ammunition companies. And their job was to supply ammunition from the ships to the shore. So they were at the major battles, Iwo Jima, all of the major battles. But the time came when they actually started to participate in combat. Now, they didn't participate as a total unit because, like I say, they worked primarily taking ammo from the ship to the shore. And there was cases when they did, participate. And there was one particular incident in the Battle of Peleliu, where the white Marines was really taking heavy casualties. And one of the forward units had sent their first sergeant back to the beach to get new replacements. And when he got back there was no replacements. So one of the black sergeants from the Black Marines says, we will go. So the first sergeant said, well, who are you? He said, we're Marines. And he said, there is no colored Marines. And the sergeant says, yes, we are. We're here and we'll go. So in desperation for replacements, he took them. When he get up to the front, he tells his company commander, the company commander said, well, what you got there? He said, well, these are Marines. He said, there is no colored Marines. He said, well, they're here and they said they want to help. So he says, well, okay, we take them. So they started, that was their first engagement, and they started carrying casualties. And one of the accounts was saying that they was carrying stretchers with one hand and shooting at the enemy with the other. And they transported all of these here wounded white Marines back to the back. And where the story comes at, one of the white Marines asked one of the other white Marines, so who was those guys? And the other white Marine says, those were the Black Angels of Peleliu. And when he got out of the Marine Corps, went back to Florida, he wrote a book about it, the Black Angels of Peleliu. And that was one of their first engagements. It was after the Battle of Iwo Jima where they were there, and General Smith said the Black Marines was no longer on, they was no longer on a temporary, they were actual Marines. He said, they are Marines now. And from that time on, up until in 1949 was when they disbanded Montford Point and integrated into the regular Marine Corps. So that, and then, you know, World War II, I mean, Korea and all of that, they were actually regular integrated into the force. So that's basically the story.
Well, good afternoon, Sergeant Major. This is Tom Pittock with University of Michigan-Dearborn. Hey, I remember you back in February telling a story about how it all started. Why Montford Point? Can you kind of revisit that? Because I know that segregation in the Marine Corps was a real thing, and the Black Marines had to really basically start from ground zero to establish themselves right from the get-go in basic training. Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Well, in the very beginning, after the president had signed the order to integrate the forces, the commandant of the Marine Corps, General Holcomb at the time, he resisted and says that we do not want colored Marines. He says they can go join the Army or they can join whatever they want to do, but we don't want them in the Marine Corps. So it came down to a point where the president had to give the commandant a direct order. You will take colored Marines. So at that time, he said that well, they went to Camp Lejeune and designated Montford Point as where they would train the Black Marines. When they came in, they even forced them. Montford Point at that time was an overran, abandoned camp on Camp Lejeune. So they forced them to actually build their own camp. And they had to cut the trees, they had to do everything and build it up from ground zero. So the buildings and stuff that was there, the barracks, they were living in tents and then they had to build the barracks. So that was the gist of it. But after they was brought into also, I will say that even the history of most of the Black units, not only the Montford Point Marines, but other units, they had really no intentions of using them in combat. And because of the war and as it drug on, they were forced for manpower purposes and everything. They was forced to use the units. And so then the Marine Corps, that's how they ended up sending them over. But I think that was the part I was telling you about, was that they were actually forced to build their own camp.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Sergeant, you also was telling a story about one of the generals who were overseeing the training of the Montford Point Marines. And I can't remember the general's name, but how he was impressed with how they were, conducted and how they operated.
Well, it might have been the colonel that was assigned to Montford Point. One thing to understand is that in the military at that time, basically, if you was an officer and you was assigned to be in charge like of a black unit, that wasn't really a good thing for your career. And I talked to one of the captains. He was retired. I talked to him down in Washington, D.C., and he told me about he was Jewish. And matter of fact, I think he said he was the only Jewish officer in the Marine Corps at the time. But he said when they heard that they was going to bring in blacks to train as Marines, he said that he knew what they were going to go through. So him and a few other officers that was understanding and sympathetic, basically, of the black soldiers, volunteered to go to Montford Point to be officers in that command. And even some of his friends told him, says, man, you're basically signing a death warrant on your service. You're going down there. And he says, well, I know what they're going to go through, and I know they need me. So he volunteered to be one of the officers that went. But the colonel that trained the Montford Point Marines, he was very impressed with how they adapted, and everything that they threw at them, they took it and they kept on moving. And one of the drill instructors in the very beginning, they had all white drill instructors because, of course, there was no black Marines. And one of the white drill instructors that they told them that we was actually sent here to run you guys out. That was our job, was to force you guys out of the Marine Corps. And he said, y'all have taken everything that we dished out. And y'all have proven to us that you are entitled to be in the Marines. So from this point forward, we're going to train you as Marines. And they did. So, and the colonel, I think he was talking about, I think his name was Colonel Richardson. He was very basically protective of it as much as he could be. And they trained as Marines, but he tried to make life livable. Although life in the Marine Corps it's not livable at all. So, but I think that's the one you were talking about. They went on to have incidents overseas. There was a case of on Guam where they had black Marines end up getting in large fights. There was problems with the MPs, and so they went through the whole gamut of the racial issues. But in the end, they came out to be. We have one of the Montford Point Marines. He was one of the last ones out. Ended up going to Korea, and he became one of the most decorated Marines in the Marine Corps. He was the most decorated Montford Point Marine. And he served in Korea with Chesty Puller, and he also served in Vietnam. But that's, you know, so many stories there.
I remember. Go ahead, Tom.
So when the Marine Corps finally accepted the Marines from Montford Point and integrated them into the Corps, what was that transition like? Do you can you elaborate?
And in talking with a couple of people that have been around, it was pretty brutal because, like I said, as large as the Marine Corps was, when you took the Black Marines from Montford Point and threw them into the mix, they separated them all. And, you know, you might be the only, I was talking to there was one Marine saying that in the whole company, 300 and some Marines, he was the only Black in there. And eventually it adapted and he gained friends and, you know, people stood by him, but it was very tenuous for them. I was reading, not so much, but it was a lot the same area of time, and people don't understand how entrenched the racism was at the time, because there was one incident where the one of the white Marines that was associating with the Black Marines on base, he went out into town with them, and he was treated worse in town than they were because he was with them. And he told them, he said, from that time on, he never even went back into town. And he says, I don't know how you guys do it. He said, but I can't. He couldn't even go back down. He stayed on base. He said the rest of his time. He says it was so bad. Not with the Montford Point Marines, but with it was an Army tank battalion. There was an incident where one of the soldiers was talking to an MP at the front gate, and they was having some words back and forth. And the local sheriff walked up and shot the Black soldier in the head and says, down here, and I'll use the word, he said, down here, niggas don't talk back to white people. And there was nothing done about it. He killed him right there on the spot. And there was nothing done about it. So it was real. It wasn't like what a lot of people think. It was very real then. And it was very, very real to all of them. And even now, I came in 65, and my experience in I had experiences in down at Paris Island, and there was one way when I went to drill instructor school in 66. There was a white sergeant that went down there with me, and when we was on our way down to the base, we was stopped. Well, we had stopped, but a state trooper, South Carolina state trooper, came up on us, and he admonished this white sergeant because he was riding in the car with us, and they had some words back and forth. And the state trooper told this white sergeant at the time, he said, "You one of them Yankees from Boston." He said, "You're gonna be down here for a while, and I'll see you again." Sure enough, about 2 weeks later, that white sergeant was in town, and that state trooper had about 3 or 4 of his buddies beat him up, and they ended up breaking his ribs. And he said, that's your message for you being with those colors. So it was real. It was real. Yes, it was very real. Any more questions?
Wow.
So, yeah, you came in at a tumultuous time in our racial history as the United States. How did that improve in your career as a Marine? How did you see improvements? Did you see things that were working that brought the units together? And how did that all work out?
Yeah, it improved a lot. When I first came in, there was no, matter of fact, my drill instructors from day one had made a point that there would be no distinction. But there was always different issues. Now, after I came back from Vietnam on my first tour, the Marine Corps started to address those issues directly. And we used to have sessions where we would have a meeting together. And during these sessions, there would be no rank. And everybody could sit in this meeting and really express what they felt about the racial situation. And there was and you know, from the beginning, you knew that we're going to talk frank, we're going to discuss stuff. And I think that worked out, that helped a lot because people was able to express themselves and it helped out a lot. And there was changes, but it improved, and it improved quite a bit because the military itself addressed the issue. The Marine Corps addressed the issue, and it improved quite a bit. But like in anything, you have people that if they want to use that as their crutch, they're gonna always use it, you know. And you're gonna have that 10% that's not gonna perform no matter what. But they will use that as a crutch.
Well, I want to make sure that I thank you for your service. And there's a question here that talks a little bit about the transition back to civilian life after the military. Can you talk a little bit about your transition as you left the Marine Corps and, if there was any biases or any kind of racial disparities that you experienced as you were making that transition?
I personally did not. When I got out and came into the civilian world, as an individual, I ended up wanting to go back because it was just the civilian life just wasn't getting it. So matter of fact, I almost went back. I ended up joining the reserves and staying in the reserves. But my original, when I got in 69, matter of fact, I was going to go to college, and I probably stayed out a year because there was so much, you hear about so much turmoil on the campuses and everything. And, but I eventually went in and, I never really had any problems. But I know guys that did have, they ran into the real problems. But no, it wasn't real transition for me. Not bad.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. I guess answering that same question with a little bit, I'd say update or more recent transition to getting out of the military. I got out in 2017. And for me, it was the hardest part about leaving the military was leaving the friends and the family that I had in the military. That was the roughest transition for me. Everything else, I was fine, not waking up at 6 a.m. going for runs and things like that.
Yeah.
But leaving the, as I would always say, the boys, leaving the family, the friends behind, that was pretty rough for me because I came back home. I had my family, my biological family, but you kind of grow close to people in the military, almost closer than the ones that are blood related to you. And, they kind of created, I guess, a safety net or a safe zone, safe space, a weird kind of safe space, if you may. And without that, when I got out, I was a bit lost for a while. So I guess I transitioned into just partying and drinking for a while, just to fill that void. But it got to me that I realized that, okay, I need to do something with my life. I need to get it together. And that's when I end up getting into, coming to the University of Michigan and transition there. The first, I'd say, semester, or excuse me, not going to the University of Michigan. I started at Henry Ford. My very first semester, I was a very quiet kid. I didn't say anything to anyone, just went to school, did my work, left. Didn't want to make any friends. I was in my bubble. It's like, don't pop that bubble because you don't want to know what happened if you pop the bubble. I did not let myself come out of that bubble. But eventually I realized that, one, I'm putting off a very hostile vibe. And two, like that's not healthy to just stay in, just all about Frank, don't mess with Frank. But I came out of it, and I really came out of it when I came to the University of Michigan, because that's when I joined the student veteran organization. I got met Tom, I met other veterans, realized like, I'm not the only one dealing with this. It's like, these are, everyone else is dealing with it and they're doing fine. So yeah, it is a bit of a culture shock, even, getting out, whether it's now or if I got out later. But yeah, it was definitely a transition.
Well, my issue was I really wanted to stay in the Marine Corps, but it was in the height of the Vietnam War, and everybody was getting killed, plain and simple. Matter of fact, I was offered a chance to become an officer, but I knew that the survival rate of second lieutenants in Vietnam was very low. And from the time, matter of fact, the issues I dealt with, even coming back, one of the things I used to always think about is I couldn't remember hardly anybody that I served with my first tour. And then later on, I found out why. And that was because almost everybody I served with got killed. And that came out as a part of my, I guess you'd say PTSD or whatever, but I had put that behind me but I always had this issue that I couldn't remember hardly anybody that I served with. And then when I got back, and many years later, matter of fact, even after I retired, and I was going over some of my records and stuff, and I started looking at the names and started remembering the names, and I realized that all these guys that got killed. So that was one of the things, that so many people was dying, and I knew so many guys that was scheduled to be career Marines, that their families and stuff said, the wives, either you give it up or I'm gone. But that's what was happening. So many people was getting killed. Yep.
So Sergeant Major Owens, there's a question here, and this may be something that maybe Frank can help out with too. It is, how does the military compare to civilian population when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So how does the civilian side and the military side compare? I spent 23 years in the military, but my service was so much different than combat or DOD because I was United States Coast Guard and my missions were more humanitarian. I do know that about 16% of the Coast Guard was diverse, but that made up for Asian, Hispanics, African American. That was the majority of our diverse population. But to answer this question, how does the military compare to civilian when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, how does it compare?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. How does it compare?
Yes, sir.
I think one of the things, especially where I served in the military, and I noticed that me being in the Marines, and I was in infantry units all my time, because of what you're facing, you're closer together, and there is almost no problems at all on that issue. When you get with other units that they're not frontline units, they're more administrative or what like this, I think there's more time or more place for people to get their own personal inhibitions coming up. And out here in the civilian world, I think the ability that you don't have to live with anybody, whereas in the military, you got to live together. You got to depend on each other. And out here in the civilian world, you can do or say what you think and take it home at the night or whatever. So that's why I think the military is a lot closer, because they have to live together and they face challenges, even if the challenge is just training. Like when we went through, you go through mountain warfare school. When that unit goes out to mountain warfare school and they spend 3 or 4 weeks climbing mountains and helping each other, they're tight. They come back, they're much tighter than somebody that's not doing it. And they don't have to face that out here in the civilian world. It's also like me being a police officer so many years. The street cops, they take care of each other and they know they got to depend on each other. So they're closer and the race goes out. So I think that's one of the differences in the civilian world.
One of the things that I noticed about race or just race in the military is, like you said, Sergeant Major Owens, you have to live together, you have to be together, you have to do all these things together. In the military, you're forced to be with someone. It doesn't matter what their race is. So you have to deal with your issues, their issues, both of you guys' issues. So it kind of, it helps that you're forced to be in these situations with people that otherwise you would not be in situations with. I know that there was this one guy that I was stationed with, and we got to talking. He said he never saw a Black person until he joined the military. One of the greatest guys I know. It's a situation that he would not have been in had he not joined the military. Now, in the civilian world, you basically have a choice. It's, I might have these worldviews. Do I want to challenge my worldviews by, going to talk to someone else with different worldviews, or do I want to stay in my little bubble, the bubble that I was talking about earlier? And unfortunately, with the civilian world, you can stay in that bubble. You can stay in that bubble and not have to deal with anything. With the military, you're kind of forced to deal with it. But also, like you said, Sergeant Major Owens, combat units, you don't really have time to deal with all that, I hate to say, foolishness with, what race is this guy? What does he believe in? What does that person believe in? You're out there doing your thing. You have to rely on the guy or woman to your left and right. With non-infantry units, or as they would call it in the military, POG units. I was in one of those as well. You get a lot of time for bickering and things like that. The biggest issues I had was it was just a bunch of childishness in those units, the he say, she say kind of thing. Not so much with race, but I can see how there could be some racial tensions in those units versus a combat unit.
Yeah.
So there's one more question here. Oh, I'm sorry, Sergeant Major, you got something to add?
No, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So we have another question. This question is, how did your views of the military differ from those after your immersion in the Marine Corps? So this one was specifically asked that you would answer it. So essentially, how did your views of the military differ from after those of your immersion in the Marine Corps. So I think what this individual is saying, after you got out of the military, how did your views of the Marine Corps change, or did they not change? The person who asked the question, you feel free to correct me if I am off base here. So,
Well, me personally, when I had no idea what I was going into, especially when I went in the Marine Corps. So I mean, you've seen movies and stuff like that, and but when you got in there and it became real, it was a difference, and that it was real. The stuff you saw in the John Wayne movies and all of that stuff, and you got in there and found out that, you know, that wasn't what it was really all about. And you found out how much you had to really, you know, depend on each other, and how you had to train. And so that was the difference. It was so much real as opposed to what you saw. Only thing I had was the movies, and it wasn't like that at all. Yeah.
well, thank you. So, Phil, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I do believe we got time for one or two more questions. So if you have any questions for Sergeant Major Owens, please drop it in the chat, and we'll be sure to ask the question.
Yeah, we're good on time. We put a little buffer zone in here for you.
Okay, good deal. So I do know that the Montford Point Marines had to overcome a lot of barriers in their endeavor to integrate into the U.S. Marine Corps. And you had mentioned that there was an Army, I think it was a tank battalion that was highly decorated. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the 761st Tank Battalion was actually the only Black tank battalion that went into World War II. And they started out, there was 4 tank battalions, I believe it was at Fort Knox, Kentucky, that was training. General Patton had came back to the United States because he was getting ready for D-Day. And so he was looking at tank units to replace his. And he he saw the 761st. And this is one of the reasons I say about the issue that they never had intended for them to go to war. When General Patton was down there looking, he had looked at all these tank battalions, and he asked the commanding officer, said, "What's that unit on the other side of the mountain that's training?" And he said, "Well, those are the colored guys. You don't want to look at them." So Patton told him, says, "I'll decide who I want to look at." And he said, "Take me, let me see him." So Patton got up on the hillside, and he was watching the 761st training in the valley. They say he watched them half the afternoon. And then when they finished, he told him he wanted to talk to him. He says, I am the most experienced tanker in the Army. He says, "I've been watching you guys all afternoon, and you're one of the best tank battalions I've ever seen." And he says, "I want you to join my Army." And so they said they would. So he said, "I will be sending for you." So anyway, the command, after Patton left, they didn't want these guys to go. So they transferred them to I think it was Fort Polk, Louisiana. But when Patton got ready for D-Day, he had sent for them, but they were having trouble finding this unit. So he ended up going to through D-Day without them. When they got bogged down at the Battle of the Bulge, General Patton told Eisenhower that he could lead the breakout. And Eisenhower told him, says, if you can, says, okay. But when I tell you the word, you only got 3 days. So Patton immediately sent back to England to have the 761st sent over. And they came to France and he said, I told you that I want you to join my army. He said, now you're here. He says, and you're going to make your people proud, and you damn sure better make me proud. He says, I want you to lead the breakout of the bulge. He says, when I give you the word, I want you to take off, head for Berlin, kill any damn thing in your way, and don't stop. We'll be right behind you. So they led the Third Army out of the breakout of the bulge and on the way to Berlin. So that was, they spent something like 80 some days in combat. So they was tremendously decorated, but they led Patton's army. And that's one of the things you very rarely ever hear about. But they were the only black unit, only black tank battalion. Yeah, it was the 761st Tank Battalion.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yep.
It's awesome. That is amazing.
There was a number of incidents. Like people don't know, the Buffalo Soldiers, in World War II, they were the Buffalo Division. And they went to Italy. And they served in Italy. So there was a number of units like that.
Awesome.
I think the Navy had a ship. There was a destroyer. There was an all-black crew. Yeah. So it was a number of units like that. But the Marine Corps finally, like I said, they finally accepted the Montford Point Marines and integration. Most everything was lost. It was funny that the Commandant of the Marine Corps, I'm trying to remember his name, but a couple of commandants back, and he was the one that really started bringing out the information about the Montford Point Marines. And he said that I have been in the Marine Corps 30 some years and I rose all the way to commandant and I never knew about the Montford Point Marines. I never knew anything about it. That was how, it was amazing that how you're commandant of the Marine Corps, you've been in the Marine Corps 30 some years and you never knew that it ever existed.
Oh, that's something right there. Did not know that the Marine Corps even had a all-black unit, especially being there for 30 some years.
Right.
But it was interesting. Like there's a lot of history from black soldiers, black units, and things like that. That is that people don't know of. That is unheard of now. And I feel like we should just do our best to put a spotlight on that when we can, and just spread the word and let people know. Because honestly, before I met you, I didn't know about the Montford Point Marines. I had no idea about them. So yeah, definitely. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to sit and talk with us, Sergeant Major Owens. If anybody has any last questions, please drop them in the comments. But yes, it's been a very educational experience with you here today.
We've had several people thank you, Sergeant Major, for your commitment and your service to our great country. Despite the obstacles you had, thank you so much for all you did. Thank you very much for educating us on this today. This is very, very informative, and we'd like to keep your number handy and maybe have you come back for Veterans Day next year and talk with us some more.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Take care, Sarah. Stay well.